Hello and welcome to another video conversations on Awaz-e-Haqiqat, which translates to the voice of truth. I'm your host, Chris Malika Bhadra, and depending on whichever part of the world you're watching me or all of us today or tonight, as you can see on my panel, I'm joined by some very amazing, inspiring women that I've met or I've heard about or I've read across on social media. What binds us together are two things. One is the topic that I'm going to be talking and discussing with them tonight because it's nighttime in Melbourne, so I'm going to be saying tonight. And two, I know that all of them have very strong thoughts or viewpoint when it comes to standing up for women's rights. Let me clarify at the beginning that by that, do we mean that we don't stand up for men's rights? We obviously actually do. But the topic that we are talking tonight is about Gisele Pelicot. So for some information, for those of you who might not have heard about her, Gisele is a French woman who was covertly drugged and raped by her husband, Dominique Pelicot, on numerous occasions over a 9-year period between 2011 till 2020. He also invited 72 other men in total, who he contacted through a website to abuse her while she was unconscious, mostly in their home. Gisele only became aware of the abuse in 2020 when Dominique was arrested for upskirting women in a local supermarket, and a police search of his computer found those images of her. Since then, the trial followed, but what significantly changed is Gisele waived the right to anonymity. She showed her face, and by that, she has shifted the shame. The women are not to be at the shame when they are assaulted. The shame lies in the perpetrator who is doing it. And that is the crux of the conversation we are having today. Before I begin, let me start the conversation by acknowledging the traditional owners of the land on which I'm meeting all of these ladies tonight. I come from the land of the Kulin Nation. And I would also like to pay my respect to the elders, past, present, and emerging. Now, coming on to my amazing panel here, I'm joined by Nandini Sen Mehra. Nandini's debut book of poetry is Whorls Within. She also co-authored Unburden, Playful Principles for Joyous Living, published by Penguin in 2022 with eminent teacher Nithya Shanti. Some of her political and feminist poems have been published in Outlook, The Punch magazine, Usawa Literary Journal, and other magazines and anthologies as well. She is a communication specialist and is with Hindus for Human Rights, an organization that advocates for pluralism and human rights and provides a Hindu violence of resistance to caste, racism, and all forms of bigotry and oppression. Thank you for joining me, Nandini. Very good evening to you.
Thank you.
Samira Singh works in IT as an analyst and is passionate about women's rights, development, and mentors women looking to get their foot in the door in IT. When she's not running behind a toddler, you'll find her listening to True Crime podcasts on Spotify. And she's currently listening to Uncover by the Canadian Broadcasting Corp. Samira, thank you for joining me tonight.
Thank you for having me.
Pleasure. Anushka Pal is a passionate psychologist driving advocacy and change for minority communities across Australia. Anushka is the founder of Need Psychology, a psychology private practice and social enterprise which aims to provide accessible, culturally informed mental health care. In an effort to destigmatize mental health and create better access to mental health care in multicultural communities, Anushka has developed Safe Space, mental health literacy, and international student programs. Thank you so much for joining me, Anushka. Very welcome.
Thanks for having me. I'm so excited for this.
Likewise. And last but not the least, Mahashweta, or Masha as I lovingly call her because she's been my junior. Mahashweta is a trained science communicator with keen research interest in nanomaterial biomedical applications. Having traversed across different parts of rural, suburban, and urban India, experiences and dialogues with women in varied communities have been instrumental in shaping her as a progressive and pragmatic person. She's also been an advocate for women's rights and uplifting women's status across different strata, having encouraged and provided support to young Indian women to overcome the societal shackles and tribulations. On that note, very warm welcome to you as well, Masha. Thank you for joining.
Thank you for having me, Chris. Thank you so much. Yeah.
All right, the first things first, guys. Let's start with the simple question, a question that I've been asked, a question that I keep asking my panel, and somewhere I feel there's always a gray line. What are your individual opinions on marital consent? And Anushka, since you're the first on my screen, I'll start with you first.
Oh man, I have so many thoughts, but the main one is that marital consent, it's ongoing, it's a mutual agreement between partners, irrespective of the legal and emotional commitment of a marriage. And I used to be a school psychologist, and we would run these consent workshops, and it's amazing to see even amongst young people, just, you know, people who are like in year 9, year 10, and the misconception that marriage equals permanent consent,
Right.
which really undermines autonomy and individuality on so many levels. And I think if I had to sum it into one thing, marital consent, it's so important. Like, just because you're married to somebody, it does not define the fact that you're allowed to do whatever you want. Like, it doesn't give you an automatic yes. At least that's where I'm at.
Perfect. Thanks, Anushka. Nandini, I'll come to you. What are your thoughts on marital consent?
I think it's a very important question because there is so much conditioning around marital consent, both from the male and the female, or the two partners' point of view. The conditioning revolves, around, as Anushka said, this consent in perpetuity. And I think marital consent, while it may or may not be verbalized at every stage of the relationship, it is a really good indicator of the health of the relationship and what's happening outside of intimacy as well.
Right.
And it's a really good indicator of how seen you are in the marriage, and how understood you are, and how open you are, and how fearless you are. And fearless is a word that has a lot of depth and connotation in a marriage, especially, I'd say, in traditional communities and traditional societies, because it is not a simple question of saying yes or no. There are many connotations to that yes or no. So I think it, like I said, it's an important question. There is perhaps a lack of understanding about the fact that it even exists. So let's just be there.
Right. Thank you, Nandini. Samira, over to yourself. What are your thoughts?
I'm 100% in agreement with what Anushka and Nandini have already covered, so I probably won't say that. But I think for me personally, it is deeply rooted in the respect of the marriage. As you and your partner, your intimate relationship is something so personal, so vulnerable, and consent is the crux of it. Especially in relationships of today where you've met people on different platforms, or you're being arranged, or relationships might not be on the longer commitment side. The very basic thing in a relationship is consent. You would ask your partner consent or their opinion if you wanted to go out to eat. This is something as simple as going out to a restaurant. But having sex or being intimate is something so much more personal. To me, it's a non-negotiable to even think that that's up in the air, or as a question that consent is something. Unfortunately, though, there are laws in so many countries that have so much ambiguity around marital consent that it almost kind of topples people's thinking around whether or not it truly exists, and whether it's actually a trope, or whether that's something that we need to even discuss. So for a lot of people, a lot of men and women, I would say, it's, we're married. What do you mean consent? So for me, it is, I guess to summarize that, it is the very depth and respect and crux of a relationship.
Amazing. Thank you. Thanks, Samira. I'll come to you, Mahashweta. What are your thoughts on marital consent?
I'm in agreement with what Samira, Anushka, and Nandini said, and they pretty much summed up everything I also wanted to say. I wanted to add that it's a non-negotiable. It has to be mandatorily open, and especially today, it wasn't open before. It was a very hush-hush thing. And I also believe that young girls should be educated about it. They don't know about it, and it's something that across generations there needs to be a whitewashing of these kind of important aspects of marriage. Girls are pushed into marriage in South Asian communities without even explaining what consent is and how important it is. So it is a non-negotiable aspect of marriage or any relationship. Just like she said, that it's as basic as, do you like tea or coffee? When and consent for a woman should be treated as a human right. It is not, but it should be. So more dialogue is needed on establishing its significance in society currently today.
Right,
So
absolutely.
that
Thank you,
is what
David.
I feel.
Yeah. If I were to pin down as a host, just my 2 cents, I think it's equally important for both the people in the marriage. We often tend to undermine what the man is kind of going through. It's equally important. Not today's conversation is about Gisele, but I just wanted to highlight so that we don't get asked again that what about men's rights? Men's rights are equally important. Their consent also needs to be taken into consideration. All right. So the reason I started with this question in the conversation is that Gisele was a married woman, right? So she was married for X number of years, but she was abused by her husband without her consent, right? And then additional men, that's the different part of the story. We're not going here right now. So my question is, how do the principles of consent apply to couples who are in long-term married relationships? And should that be any different in the way couples approach consent in, say, 30 years of marriage or 20 years of a relationship? What dynamic happens? This time, Nandini, I'll start with you.
I think it's firstly, it's difficult to generalize on all marriages, right? Every dynamic is different,
Yes.
and every dynamic also changes over time. For instance, there
Yes.
could be different stages in which one partner is more sexually active, has greater desire than the other.
Mm.
And the way I think the fundamental thing that evolves over a long marriage is that you need to learn to communicate better. Because things change, you change, your partner changes, your bodies change, your needs change, your situation changes. And if you're not communicating, what was okay, perhaps when you were 20, is not okay maybe when you're 30, or is not okay when you're 40. Or you may have different desires when you're 30 or 40. So the idea of consent, whether it's about just the act of intimacy or whether it is about any other, experimentation even that you want to bring into your marriage. Because a lot of the conversation around this case in France was that some of the arguments from the perpetrators, from the men, was, oh, we thought this was just something that they were role playing, right? So there is this ambiguity around, which is a convenient ambiguity, where you can say that, oh, I didn't know, right? So this is where especially in a long-term marriage, I think it's really important to recognize that human beings are evolving, changing creatures, and so is our sexuality. And if you're not talking, and if you're not actively engaging with your partner, not listening and making sure that you're being seen as well, chances of miscommunication, that's the most mild sort of version that I will take of sexual intercourse without consent, where you have misunderstood or you have not understood.
Yeah.
And I think the greatest barrier to that, apart from conditioning, is the lack of communication.
Sure. Sami, you've heard what Nandini had mentioned. So the same question, that how does the dynamic change in a long-term married relationship?
That was really well put. I think the basics of your life, as you evolve in your life, your sexual relationship, your partner will evolve or change. It might slow down, it might increase. You may see different periods where you initiate or your partner initiates. I think firstly, to be open to that, like you need to have an understanding that it will change. You will not be the same that you are in your 30s, when you had a baby. I think, a lot of, I recently had a baby a year and a half ago, and a lot of conversation in the mums groups was around reduced libido and how to approach that with your partner. And that became a real hot topic of conversation, because a lot of women didn't want to disappoint their partners. A lot of women feared that their partners would go away and try and, seek that elsewhere or outside. So, in these long-term relationships where you also have children and you have these additional kind of responsibilities outside of just the both of you, it is so important to communicate. It is so important to be patient. It is so important to have that openness that things will not look the same. It may come back to the same or what you desire in 10 years, 20 years. Maybe it won't. I think in long-term relationships, consent, how men and women give consent will evolve. And I think for partners, it's that working together, it's that openness, it's that expression of, hey, my sexual desires are not matching yours, or what's going on, let's work on it. So
Right.
I think it's, yeah, it goes in peaks and troughs, and I think it's that understanding, appreciation, and acknowledgement of it.
Right. Thanks, Amy. Masha, I'll come to you, right? So you're also a parent, young parent. The same question, how does the dynamic change in a long-term relation once you have children? How does consent start looking like in that situation?
So I can speak from my personal experience. Like Samira said, so the first 2 years of after having a baby, we do mean the reduced libido is, it stays for a very long time, and when it comes back very, gradually. I mean, it doesn't really come back to the same level that it was before, we conceived. So I can at least say that for couples for whom it comes back, or they work on it, and the conversations on consent happen again and again, and it grows gradually from time to time as the baby grows up,
Right.
then it shows that the couple has a healthy relationship.
Right.
But when, it may not, the other, the other counterpart, the male counterpart of the couple
Yeah.
may not have that kind of patience, and things do go haywire. uh, those tough conversations have to take place, and but the thing is, so this will evolve, this will change over time, and this is not the same for everybody. And for people, for many, it takes a really long time to come back to that kind of desire state.
Yeah.
I mean, and and especially because of the exhaustion that motherhood brings along.
Yeah.
So I mean, I know that we do not want to embarrass our partners, we don't want to upset our partners, neither do we want to have a, we don't want to go hard on ourselves also. So whenever it does come back, it should come back, it will, I mean, it's not something that can be, generalized, like Nandini said.
Yes.
And when it happens after a very long time also, it should not involve, it should be comfortable for both,
Absolutely.
the people, and it will, from my experience, what I can say is that, I mean, I never went back to the same, you know no matter what kind of experimentation was discussed or anything. It just did not come, and I think that it would only come if I got the same kind of emotional security, or maybe, I mean, the emotional aspect, expectation from my side, from the woman's side, is so much higher, that I feel that, we, unless the emotional needs are not met and they are not taken care of in a comfortable way, meaningful way, the and if the consent is not respected, we really have very little to do. We cannot, go down or debase ourselves just because, the other side is not respecting our consent.
True.
I mean, that is something that I personally
True.
believe in.
Yeah. Thanks, Masha. Anushka, I'll come to you, but I'll kind of contour the question a bit differently since you're coming in from the mental health space, right? So he was her partner. He was doing this for X number of years. He brought another man. He took pictures, recorded everything. What was going on in his mind?
It's such a good question. Sorry, I'm doing there has to be something severely wrong with you to have acted in this way. And at least that is the opinion that I had immediately when I heard the headlines come through. And in having conversations with people around me, you really do sit down and think, like, what was going through your mind?
Yeah.
Was it and like the thing is, you don't know the ins and outs of anyone's relationship. You also don't know, like, I don't know too much about his backstory, and like, you know, everything sort of comes from somewhere.
Right.
He's saying that it is an explanation, not an excuse for his actions. But like, it makes me wonder, like, you know, did you go through some kind of like abuse yourself as a child? Did you have like a really like, you know, a really bad dynamic at home when you were growing up with your parents? Did something similar happen to you? Did you see it happen to somebody and you've internalized it? Okay, if it was none of those things, what were the influences in your life that led you to feel like you can do this to your wife, who almost, by the sounds of it, like, you know, the even looking at the time frame in which it happened, like it's really messed up, but it also kind of feels like, did something switch in you all of a sudden? Was it that you guys had an argument? Did you suddenly decide that, you know, maybe she's got more, sometimes it can be an ego thing as well, of like, you're maybe more confident than I am, or like, let me have power and control over you. It's almost like he wanted to take away her autonomy. And that's, you know, but in such a way that like she was never going to find out, and to an extent of like, how far can I go with this, and how long can I do this until like, and can I get away with it almost? And there's almost like his little secret of like, and he probably would have if somebody in that supermarket hadn't noticed him taking pictures, like that. This might, and we don't know how many more men are like this out there in the world, or like, I'm generalizing as well to like this gender, but I mean, it can happen to anybody. But at the same time, we just don't know how many people are like this out there.
Right.
And like, you know, so, and it's just even looking at the list of men who have been persecuted, I guess, and just looking at them and then looking at their like little backstories and their families and their occupations, and just thinking like, what was going through you, like at some point while you're going through with this,
Yes.
you were clearly like, you would have, you know, you've had a little bit of an inkling, this doesn't seem right. This doesn't seem right, but you went ahead with it anyway. And it's interesting to me to like, I would love to get in his head, or to be able to do an interview and just find out what were you thinking? What was the process? What has led you to make these series of decisions? And also to the point where like, it seems like he doesn't have any remorse,
Right.
you know, or understand like her perspective. I mean, like there is a dozen so things that could be going on for him, but it'd be so interesting to find out what it is that leads you to there. And I think, you know, genuinely, it's not something that starts suddenly in adulthood. I think it's something that happens from childhood, and the things that you see and the things that you grow up with, and the social aspect as well, like what is normalized within our society, in our community, and amongst our friends, right?
Yeah. True.
I mean, none of these 80 men, that's a lot of people. No one turned around and was like, you seem a bit sketchy. This is a bit wrong, you know?
Yeah.
Not one person, like what?
Everyone just went along with it.
Yeah.
Yeah. Thanks, Anushka, for bringing that. You've brought two important points. One is control, on which I want to come back later. But the first thing I want to ask the panel is, you know, we often say, oh, he must have had a difficult upbringing. He must have seen a bad marriage. That is why he's being brought up like that. And that is why he's being like that on the partner. Is that always true? Can that action be corrected? Sami, I'll start with you this time.
To be honest, it's hard for me to say whether an action can be connected. I don't quite have that psychological background, but let me put it this way. I have a son, and he may see, sorry, I have a cough. Can I just go last? Is that okay? Sorry, I'm still recovering from the cough from a couple of weeks ago. You can edit this part out. Sorry.
Yeah.
So, I mean, I might look at it this way. As someone who has a son and is raising a male, I would like to think that that can be corrected. And I'd like to think that you may see things in your childhood, or you may experience things that will shape who you are and your actions. But at the end of the day, you are also going out into the world, meeting people, and you are shaping your understanding of wrong and right from a lot of factors around you. It's not just your home life, right? And so for me, it's, if I see things like that in my child, it's about that corrective action early. It's about that open and honest discussion. I can think of an example where one of my mum's colleagues years ago, their child experienced a particularly unsavory incident in a primary school playground. And when the other child's parent was approached, to kind of discuss the incident, that parent said, well, my child's a good child at home, so didn't actually happen. So I feel like it can be fixed as long as parents and responsible adults and people around them take the accountability to try and have proactive corrective action.
Thanks.
I think that's kind of where I see change to be, that could take place.
Absolutely. Nandini, what are your thoughts on it? That can it be all put under the excuse that, oh, he must have had a difficult childhood?
It's really hard to say. Like Samira said, I think that would need a qualified person to comment on. Just from a lay point of view and as a mother, I would think that there is a role of early intervention, and there is a role of mental health, and there is a role of community, right? All of these things kind of intersect. One of the things that the internet and digital spaces have brought us is the anonymity to really form community, where there is no check and balance, because like meets like, and that like meets like can become enablers and can become quite a sort of a bubble where the normal rules of society stop applying, because then you're sort of in a subculture. And I think that's what happened. And this is true not just for this, but there are all sorts of deviant or sexually dark places where when like meets like and there is no check and there is no correction, then it only perpetuates it and it normalizes it. And that's the word that Anushka used, that what is normalized. So when you're doing this over and over again and you're meeting people who are also willing to go along with you, there is nothing you're coming up against. There is nothing that is stopping you either psychologically or physically. And that's, to my reading, that's what led to this extreme case. I mean, you can imagine someone attempting it once or twice if that's their particular kink or whatever it is. But for it to continue for as long as it did, and with as many people as it did, this is the work of community. This is the work of a particular group of people who enabled this ecosystem in which this could happen.
Absolutely. Thank you, Nandini. Masha, what are your thoughts?
I totally second what Nandini said. I have also, as a parent, I do believe that we cannot just normalize some things like these or incidents like these to men will be men, or that they had a difficult childhood. I believe that if a child is not growing up alone, if he's not an orphan, or if he grew up on the streets as a different mental health situation, that person's mental health is something different. But if a child has grown up in a home with parents, then and has gotten the basics every day, then the values that are imparted to the male and the female child should include conversations and valuable lessons age in at the age appropriate time, so that the child, whoever it is, the girl and the boy, they must know where the boundary lies. It can be a girl also in the future. I mean, there were some stories you would hear about, girls dressing up as witches and trying to do some magic on boys, and then counteracting that from the boys side and doing it on the girls. I mean, I feel that a lot of these deviations, a lot of these psychological mishaps that are happening, they need to be corrected. Like I think Samira or Anushka said, that it had to be the corrective action has to be much earlier. So I believe that at the preteen level, boys and girls both should be schooled, and this is not a one-time conversation. This is a continuous process in terms of behavioral development, that if you cannot correct the behavior of your child and at home, and you expect, and you're saying that the child is doing absolutely well in school, then probably you're not paying enough attention to your child. This is what I feel as a mother, and this applies to both boys and girls.
Absolutely.
And so I do think that it is a lot to do with a lot of conscience, conscientious, conscious parenting, and a lot of I mean, you have to teach your child boundaries. If you cannot teach your child boundaries, then what is it that you're doing as a parent? I mean, irrespective of whether you have a boy or a girl, you must. And I'm not talking about social conditioning of a boy and a girl, but I do believe that a girl must know how to um, have a dignity in front of a boy. I mean, this is not probably applicable for this case, but in general, I'm saying, and same for a boy. The boy should also know where the lines are. You cannot cross that line as a boy as well. So I think that, that boundary setting, teaching that to boys, preteen and upwards. And if it becomes more difficult, then what corrective measures need to be taken probably at 15, 16, 17 and thereafter. So I mean, this is, like I said, this is not a one-time conversation, and it needs careful monitoring in, I mean, a lot of vigilance. If parents are not vigilant, and if the parents are not okay, so there's a situation in which parents need to be vigilant. If the child is absolutely okay at home also, but the behavior of a child in every kind of environment needs to be I mean, I wouldn't say control. I mean,
I think it's
parenting.
careful observation, if you
Yeah,
put it
I
that
can't.
way.
Maybe monitor would be the right word to say, or I mean, how you train your child to behave in a certain environment. In each and every environment, it may not the environments may evolve as the child progresses in life, but the basics should, the subconscious mind of the child has to have of the child as he grows into a young adult, and another adult has to have those values in place. This is what I definitely feel. And in the case of like uh, Gisele's husband, I'm sure that I'm not sure, okay, I shouldn't say I'm sure, but I probably think that whatever that he has seen as normal, it's very sad that nobody in his life has ever told him that this is abnormal. And I mean, Anushka said about the power of community. So if there is no one in his community who could tell, no one in his community who could tell him that this is not right, if you have gone through it, it is wrong, if you are doing it, it's wrong. So somewhere that conversation has never happened with him in so much of his life, that he did not know his boundaries around all of these things were blurred. So so there was a lot of ambiguity in his understanding of consent. I mean, just to think of doing this. So that is how I see it.
Absolutely. Thank you. And thanks, Anushka, for bringing that up. Very relevant. The next relevant point that I want to bring up is control. And I'm mindful of time, so I'll try to kind of see how we go. I'm clubbing two questions here, right? So the first question for my panel is, what gives authority to men? And since we are talking about Giselle, so I'm referring to men here. So what gives authority to men thinking that a wife is almost their quotes and quotes property? And also, what enables us to abuse our partners? Who gives us that power? So these two questions clubbed into one. Who do I go with first? Sami, I'll go with you.
I think for me, we're all South Asian here. So let's just talk about our culture, or the countries that we originate from. In the 5 countries or 6 countries in South Asia, in a majority of them, the act of marital rape being criminal or a criminal act is either unclear or has only recently become criminalized. Whereas it's not the same as rape, but it's a criminal charge of a lesser amount. So let's just start with that. Our laws, the people that uphold society's law and order and how a civilized society needs to act and behave, is essentially telling its people that we're unclear whether a married couple can violate one another, essentially, can actually, indulge in intercourse where consent is questionable. So just starting with as simple as that, leave aside patriarchy, leave aside family and what your in-laws and your parents are saying. If something like that is happening to you in South Asian countries where we're all from, you can't even go to the courts or the police because it is debatable whether or not it is an actual illegal act. So I think that gives perpetrators a lot of authority. It gives them a lot of justification to these acts. Okay, outside of South Asia as well, there are still plenty of countries where it is straight away completely not illegal for marital rape to occur. And if it was to happen, there are no actual legal or criminal repercussions to it. So there's plenty of precedences where we're just in society just encouraging these acts. We're just telling people that even if it is happening to you, you don't have any other recourse. Maybe you can go get help yourself, but where? The police and the courts aren't going to provide you with that, with any support in that sense. So for me, Chris, very simply put, as society, we're not looking at the main sort of pillars of justice and law and order and behavior that sort of shapes our society. So that's kind of where the authority is coming from.
Right. Thanks, Amy. Anushka, I'll move on to you.
It's a big question. Sorry, can you repeat it for me? Because I had so many thoughts at the same time.
I know. I'll repeat there are two questions together. One is what authority, who or what gives authority to the men in this instance, thinking that the wife or the partner is their property, quotes and quotes, and who gives us the power to abuse our partners? Yeah.
They're both really great questions. I think I'd echo Samira in the fact that oh man, sorry. It's just such a big thing, right? It's just, if we stick to our community, I think being South Asian, and like I'm Fijian Indian, so like we're on a whole other island on the other side of the world, like, from South Asia itself, but how much of that culture hasn't stayed with us and how much is normalized within our communities, from like domestic violence to psychological abuse within relationships to emotional abuse within relationships, that sexual abuse isn't just seen as like a right, to an extent. And like the point around that, marital rape wasn't even like a concept that was known to us until recently. Like even if you look at our film and our literature and anything, there's always been this concept of like marriage is like the ultimate end goal, like as a almost 30-year-old South Asian woman who is not married and luckily living with very like, in a Western country, but probably also with quite like liberal parents, there's not as much pressure on me. But I know that I've had other friends, I have clients, who are like around the same age, and that pressure to get married and the importance placed on that. And then your role as a woman within that. It's like even if something like this happened to you and there's not a lot of sexual education to begin with, but if something like this happened to you and you didn't want to do it, you're almost conditioned to think that this is your job. Your job is to look after your partner, and that is in every single way possible, including physically. So like, as a woman, how do you even know that what's happening to you is wrong if you're never taught that it's wrong? Or if you're never taught that it's something that you're like, allowed to talk up about, or you're allowed to feel uncomfortable about, or that it's even something that you're allowed to enjoy. And like, let's say you even have the literacy, there's still like, I think there's almost like a level of, at least from a female perspective, there can be a bit of guilt around, oh, but why should I feel bad about this? If he wants it, so I should just give in this and that, and not really clocking that it's not okay, because there's so much weight placed on this concept of marriage itself. And I think that's really fascinating, because you know, when we come back down to like what gives us then the right to abuse people in our relationship, is it ourselves? Is it society? You know, and I think it really does come back to like the social norms. If it is okayness, like in any social situation, the moment that the collective turns around and says, this is okay, we go, okay, this is okay. You know, and it's like it's a small things as like, what's a small thing that we will normalize?
Just hitting. Just
Huh?
as simple as hitting that,
Yeah,
you know,
yeah, hitting.
just as a
Yeah,
slap. If I
yeah,
were to slap my partner, it would be so like, oh yeah, it's just a
yeah.
spat.
It's just,
It's
yeah,
just,
exactly.
Yeah.
just like we
Or
teach our
even like,
kids that you can't be violent, but we can't,
correct.
like as adults, we're so okay with being violent with one another.
100%. And like, but even with our children, right? So like, okay, I used to work in a school that was very multicultural, so that we had a lot of Caucasian kids, we had a lot of kids from ethnic backgrounds. And even as a practitioner, from like a well-being perspective, when a kid from a Caucasian background comes and says, my parents threw a shoe at me, you're like, whoa, that feels like a big deal. But when a kid from an ethnic background comes, say like Polynesian, Indian, what, you know, they almost laugh about it, like, yeah, mom threw a shoe at me, but whatever, these things happen. And you can see even in those situations, like the disparity between
Yeah.
what the collective thinks is okay versus what the collective is like, no, that's not all right.
Right.
And what we allow to then, what like I guess it's both men and women. We perpetuate all of these cycles,
Yeah.
right? And we go, this is all right, this is normal. So yeah, to some degree, I think look, ultimately it comes down to the individual. It is you're making that decision. It's not a good decision. Obviously, like you shouldn't be doing
Yeah.
it
Yeah.
on your partner. But I think a lot of it is we're conditioned. We're conditioned by the people around us.
Yeah. I was recently told by a gentleman that, oh, it's okay to kind of gently give you a slap if I love you. And I'm like, no,
No, that's not love.
it's not love.
No.
It's something very different. And you're trying to
Yeah.
club things
It's
together.
control. You're trying to control the person in front of you. You can't do that.
I think there's a narrative these days with, you know, passion
Oh, yeah.
equals some type of that violence. If I'm like, you know, if I slap you in rage, that's also my passion. Like,
Yeah, like
especially as couples, you know,
oh yeah.
with film kind of depicting things like that, and
Yeah.
just, you know, society just kind of saying, oh yeah, that's okay. And because it's happened to so many people, as Anushka
Yeah.
said, it is so normalized. And if
Because
every
then we have to accept that something's really wrong, right, as a society. And
yeah,
it's so right. It's like, oh, like I love you. That's why.
Yeah. Yeah.
No? Yeah.
All
I
right.
love you this much.
Yeah.
So I wanted to add that
Sure. Yeah.
we're in a community, or our social conditioning is based a lot on subservience. Like women are always expected to be subservient, and we have that. I mean, I personally am not a subservient person. I've never really pleased my husband by, just because he wants it. I'm personally not that kind of a person, but I do understand that we are in that kind of a culture as a South Asian, community, that and that has only started changing in the recent times because of so much conversation around consent,
Yeah.
and a lot of the times around the conversation, because the conversations now are changing around feminism, about raising our voices and improve, not just taking into consideration, but having that equal say in a relationship. So it is usually very difficult for women to position themselves as an equal in a relationship. It takes years, and I think when the conversation around consent happens, it happens as a one time conversation, but women need to put their foot down and establish the fact that it is not it you have to ask me for consent every time. And this happens only when the woman is able to really establish herself as an equal in a relationship, which we have to actively put a lot of effort in. So I think once these things become more and more normalized,
Yeah.
and more established, I think that consent will be given a lot more significance in the relationships that we are in and the next generation to come.
Sure. Thanks, Masha. Nandini, your thoughts on the power play and the control.
Interesting, really, to think about. I think, when you come from South Asian countries and fundamentally, it starts at birth, there's female infanticide, right? It starts the dining table, let's give the brother the better piece of meat. Let's create this culture of entitlement, right? And, equally, men and women are to blame within that fold of patriarchy, of creating this culture of entitlement. Therefore, a woman lives by the generosity of the men in her life.
Right.
She's because her father has allowed her to. She can wear certain clothes because her brother has allowed her to. She can have a boyfriend. So there is this entire process of growing up is because you're obligated to someone who has even allowed you to be a full human being. Speaking from law to society to education, everything enables this culture and perpetuates it. So therefore, when you take someone raised in that culture, even subliminally, a lot of us can, on the outside and on the surface, we are modern women, right? But there is so much conditioning, there's so much unlearning that even I, as a 47-year-old, have had to do over a lifetime. I grew up in India. I grew up in UP. I've lived in the North. I've lived in many smaller towns as well. And I've seen this culture of entitlement.
Right.
And when it's normalized, in some ways, that also becomes your reality because it's normalized to you as well.
Yeah.
So to break out of that is a process. So one, yes, this control and this power dynamic from birth tends to be skewed in our societies. Yes, women are sort of coming out of it. They're fighting it. Society is changing. Opportunities are changing. But I would still say it's quite slow because more women still entrenched there than women who've been able to come out of it.
Right.
The second thing of what gives a man the right to abuse a partner, it is the impunity. Because generally the onus of proving it will come on the woman, right? She will have to get more people to believe it, that that this happened, than for him to say, oh, she's overreacting, she's moody, she's being emotional, she's being immature, she doesn't understand. Or like you said, this is my love, this is my care, this is my passion, right? So this dynamic is very hard because it's very seductive as well, in a way, to get sort of trapped into it. And then to actually say, you know what, I don't want the security, I don't want peace. I'm willing to risk discomfort. I'm willing to, disagreement. I'm willing to not please my partner. These seem like very easy decisions, but at every milestone, you'll have to shed so much of conditioning and so much of even what you know as normal. So it's not easy. It's not easy. A lot of women will say, like, why didn't she leave? Why didn't she say something? Why didn't she voice? But the thing is, it's not as easy as just voicing it. It's being comfortable with discomfort when all your life you have only lived to please others. It's a very
Absolutely. Thank you, ladies. And I can already see Anushka yawning, so I'll not take too much of your time. One last question. I intentionally kept this question for the last because this was my favorite part of the whole trial that I could see. When Gisele waived off the right to anonymity, she came out in the open. She chose to show her face, and her words were, the shame must be shifted. Now, the question that I have for the panel is, why is shame always associated with a woman's name, honor, dignity? Why not with the man or whosoever chooses to commit the crime? Why is it always the woman? This time, Masha, I'll start with you. Can you hear me, Masha?
I can't hear you.
Oh.
I lost half of your question. You
Okay,
were speaking to me. I don't even know that.
Now, question is, why is shame always associated with the woman?
For South Asians, it's part of our culture. And even though, in Hinduism, I know a large part of people, or I've heard an increasingly amount of mythical content from a lot of people, which say that in Hinduism, women are given equal impetus to the men, apparently in the scriptures. But when it comes to actually seeing it in society, we don't exactly see that. We've heard that in the older times, women were given the right to live on an equal had the equal impetus as the men. But over time that changed, and it was always and I've also heard this, that in history, like in the last 500 years, this has changed because of the invasion by the Mughals and then by the British. Although I do not want to name any religious organization, but I'm not very sure that what it is like in the Western world. But I do believe that because we have, like I said earlier also, because we have that culture of subservience, we tend to look at it, uh, we always think of women as the lesser sex, and that, I mean, till the time that doesn't change, this probably might keep continuing.
Right.
Although the like to answer your question, that when the incident, always it is the victim is the woman and the perpetrator is the man. If when that is the case, the recent incident in for me would be the Ajikar incident here in India. So so I believe that this happens probably because men have always been known to be the untamed sex. I think that women have been women have to enter into their life, they have to be married off to be tamed, that women have to tame them, or they are the lions, or there is this social conditioning that is already present, that men have to be, I mean, that is what the toxic masculinity that we see all around us, that I mean, that is there that is ubiquitous. So I mean, so I believe that till the time that this doesn't change, until the time the real conversations on actual uh, the right kind of masculinity that needs to be seen, that if we have more conversations around that, probably that is when this thing will start changing. And I mean, till the time that doesn't happen, probably the dignity, always, even though the abuse is done by the man, it will always be the woman who suffers, not just on that with that incident, but after that. So even if it's not rape, if it's acid attacks or anything, so I think the more and more women that come out of that shame and put that shame back on the men, like for example, Lakshmi Agarwal, who was an acid attack survivor,
Yeah.
she launched her entire campaign and an organization to fight back that, not just that one acid attacker, but the entire community of men who think that this is correct, or the men that think that I have looked at her first, so she's my property. So she is one of those grassroots change maker and activist who really fought that back. So I think till the time we do not see more and more scores of women putting that shame back on men, we will have to keep hearing this. Also, there is a not I mean, what I personally do these days is, when a reporter, say a journalist, is reporting an incident of crime, and um I mean, the incident has happened on a man, and the reporter is writing, I we the day I have myself told many journalists, I have commented or I have pointed out that you must not write that the woman was raped. please write that the man has raped this child or this woman.
Yeah.
Please write about that man. Please put it back on the man. So till that time, I believe that we have to do the change. We have to be the change that we want to see.
Absolutely.
So this
Thank
is
you.
what I feel. Yeah.
Perfect. Anushka.
Oh man, I think it's a historical concept, right? Like whether if you look across cultures, if you look across religions, I think this whole concept that a woman's, I don't know, like shame is so often tied to her like name,
Yeah.
her honor, her dignity. Even like as like, you know, if we just come back to being like South Asian as well, like one of the things that I've heard within like at least the Fijian Indian context is like when you were a daughter, you are the honor of the family. You can anything that you do can bring shame to the family. So like, you know, and that's such a if you're taught that from such a young age, like it's such a harmful association because it stems from patriarchal control, right? Like in it's linked to so many things, your sexual purity, your like that everything is that so much of your being is so much of your existence
Yeah.
hinges on male approval almost. But then shame is also used as a weaponized tool for silence, right? Because that's how else are you going to control like people around you, whether that's men or women, but it perpetuates that cycle of oppression, right? And like as a society, we are very quick to engage in things like victim blaming and shifting responsibility. Especially like in these contexts, I think we shift the responsibility onto women. It's just like what Maha was saying before, that like you know like even in like the way that journalists write the headlines, like the shift of responsibility, like almost like, oh, it was her fault, and it's like that campaign, you know, like what were you wearing? And it just goes back to like trying to protect the perpetuator, and for like I just don't understand for what reason. And I don't know whether this is just like a social like or community concept of like if we accept this and this becomes a problem, and then like it's easier to shame a particular gender or a particular group of people or a particular person than to actually accept that there is something wrong going on and that there's actually something that we need to work on and change, you know. I think it's really incredible that Giselle's come out and like actively like said what she said, like, and that she's working on shifting the shame. I think in this context, it definitely is doing that, but we have such a long way to go.
Thank you, Anushka. Nandini, your thoughts on shifting the blame?
Very quickly, I agree. This is really, you know, it's a very old construct, tied to notions of purity, tied to notions of conspiracy of silence and control, because then what has happened can continue to happen, because the onus again comes on the woman to expose herself. And then so much, I was thinking about the language around sexual assault, right? There will be things like defiled, like a woman was defiled, you know, her virginity was taken, like the things that, so it's all about her and the fact that she lost something rather than a man lost his honor and his dignity and his control and, you know, his standing in society. It's all about what the woman has lost, and the things that she has lost are tied very deeply to her self-worth, and therefore they are tied very deeply to a sense of shame. And you know, it's a whole sort of a gourmet buffet of, you know, of patriarchy, of control, of also a certain lawlessness, right? Because it all exists in the fact that there are so few consequences. And why this case has caught the imagination, and it's heinous and it's out in the open. In homes across South Asia and the world, there are several cases of sexual abuse happening within families, by close family members, and all of that is covered by a very, very clean cloth of let's keep the family honor within our home. Let's not wash our dirty linen in public. Don't talk about this uncle. Don't expose that cousin. Don't speak about your father, your brother. And this is what women have to contend with. And I have to say, to your point, Chris, that it isn't, while majority, of course, is women, there is so much sexual abuse of children who are
Yeah.
boys as well, right?
Absolutely.
And
Yeah.
again, it's same sort of coercive control where do not speak about it because you will bring shame. And that's really something that we need people who are like Gisele to to be as role models for people who've been through this, to say, look, it's not easy, but if she could do it, maybe I could also do it.
Absolutely. Thank you, Nandini. Very beautifully said. And Sami, over to you. What about your thoughts?
Yeah, look, I think Nandini summarized it so really, really beautifully. I really liked the bit at the end where what you said. I think the only thing that I would like to add to that is just, I guess, a continuation of what I think both Maha and Nandini said previously. It's that the woman carries the honor of everybody. You know, a woman being allowed to do something is behest to a man, whether it's the father or the brother or the husband, and I think those notions tied deeply rooted in patriarchy and and just, I guess, the gender role that a man needs to lead the pack, a woman needs to look after and nurture, and you carry the honor of the house. So if you set foot outside of boundaries, whether it be intentional or brought upon yourself, you carry the shame of it all. So I think Giselle waiving the right to anonymity is kind of breaking that shackles. And this isn't just South Asian, this is just across the globe. Like, we, as society, this whole concept of gender role, and a woman's, role within the family, within any family, whether she may be married or not, is that nurturer, the caretaker, the bearer of the honor. And I think this step is kind of, I guess, challenging that a bit more. We think, those were notions of the past, but I was recently watching a reel, and Andrew Tate, I hate mentioning him, he's got a huge fan following, can I just say, and young boys said something like, feminists are just strayed because they have no strong male leading them. So women are just born to obey, essentially. And the reason that they're feminists is that they haven't found a strong male role model to basically bring them back to the path of womanhood. Right? Yeah, I know. So I hate mentioning him. I'm so sorry for bringing it up. But I think we think about it as deeply rooted, but it's also coming back. It's coming back in different forms. It's challenging progress that we've made so far, and it's challenging the concept of free thinking, women actually being equal in relationships or striving for equality otherwise in society. So it's, for me, that waiver of anonymity kind of brought the conversation back to that as well, to kind of be like, I get it, there's a huge influx of these anti-feminist movement and, alpha male syndrome. This is kind of bringing to attention that, it isn't the language around women and what happens to women needs to shift. The onus of responsibility needs to be on the perpetrator, not the victim. And this is genderless. Like, it needs to be the perpetrator being held responsible rather than the person who it's been done to. There should be support for the person that has endured, and there should be the kind of transparency and the kind of, I guess, revelations that are done for people that are victims needs to be done the other way. So I think, it was, as you said, Chris, it was probably one of the best things to see out of that, the ability of this really brave woman to say, I will waive, my right to anonymity and actually be an example, was immensely brave. And I hope that it brings more conversations around this. The shift will take a while,
but it has started, and I just hope it is here to stay.
Absolutely. And I think for me, it's, the only other thing I'll say is that, to see shift in countries like South Asia may take time, because women, obviously Giselle comes from a particular socioeconomic background. She comes from a particular country where she's able to rebuild with or without support, right? We're mistaken in thinking that every woman is at that same like, it's not a plateau. Like, there are women in communities that we live in that are heavily dependent on either parents or husbands, and may not be able to step out and have that kind of support to rebuild life if something similar were to happen. So I think that freedom of
Yeah.
having those options goes hand in hand with the ability to say, I will waive that right to anonymity. And I think that acknowledgement is so important, because without that freedom, your ability to actually be able to do something like this is heavily diminished, and I think probably impossible. And, you know,
I'd just like to add one last thing before we kind of close this conversation is when a woman is trying to stand up, I think as women, we need to also support her, because most often than not, what happens in our societies is women are the first people who try to bring other women down, that, oh my God, how could you do this? How could you not be a mother at this age? Why are you not having a second child? We need to stop going after each other's lives for Christ's sake. Let us be each other's strongest supporters. We need to be allies. Otherwise, we can never win this war. I think this is just my 2 cents.
I think women are so deeply also rooted in patriarchy that what we need to do is unlearn.
Yeah. All right, ladies. One last thing, one final thing. I promise, and I'll let you go and get you your beauty sleep. What would be your message to your listeners? But I just want it in one line, a message to our listeners. This time, I'll start with Nandini.
One line, gosh. Let's try and be brave, not just for ourselves, but for all the generations of women who didn't have the option to be, and for all the generations of women to come.
Thank you. Wonderful. Sami.
I think for me, it's about kindness. It's to be kind to one another, as simple as you don't know what the other person, what the other woman's going through. So wherever you are in life, be kind, because someone isn't on that same level as you, or experiencing the same thing.
Amazing. Thanks, Sami. Masha?
Okay, I have 2 things to say.
One line. 2 things in one line.
So one is be the change that you want to see.
Yeah.
And 2 is that I second you when you say that we should be empowering each other instead of pulling each other down. And we need to build a very robust sisterhood. This is what Indra Nui says, and I truly believe in it. So when we empower each other and take care of each other and be empathetic towards each other, and that is when the real change will start, happening. And I also believe that I think there's a lot of lack of policy making around marital consent. I do believe that in the future there should be some laws that protect marital consent.
Thank you, Masha. And Anushka, final words.
I would say that no means no and yes means yes every time, in every context. I think it's crucial that we're creating safe spaces for survivors by listening without judgment, offering support, and actively challenging harmful cultural norms that enable this type of abuse or any type of abuse.
Thank you. Wonderful, ladies. Thank you. So to our audiences, listeners, whoever watched us tonight on the video, we had some amazing ladies from different walks of life, and we were discussing on the recent Gisele Pelicot case. She came out, she waived the right to anonymity. She showed up her face because the abuse that occurred to her was not hers to bear with in the first place. So if you've heard us for the first time on this panel, I really, really hope that you had a lot to take away from whatever these amazing ladies had to share. A no means a no, yes means a yes, empathy, respect, and sisterhood. I think these are all the words that I could kind of take away as a facilitator. And if you've heard me for a while, I hope that you like the content that has been brought to the table. If you've got any words or thought, please write to me at Awaz-e-Haqiqat@gmail.com. Or if you want to get in touch with any of these amazing guests, please write to me as well. And please follow us for me on Facebook, Instagram, and in YouTube. I would love to hear your thoughts and comments on what did you like or not like about this conversation. Till then, my panel, thank you so much for joining me. It was an honor having this conversation with all of you. I hope we can have many of these ongoing conversations in the future. Thank you so much for joining me. Have a great night.
Thank you for having us.
Yes.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Bye.